Most people assume that someone who spends an entire weekend completely alone must be lonely or broken or hiding something. But what if the opposite is true? What if that person is experiencing something that most brains are simply not wired to access? And what if the reason you have never been able to explain it to anyone is not because something is wrong with you, but because their brain genuinely cannot process what yours does naturally? Drop a comment right now and tell me, do you feel more alone in a crowd or more alive completely by yourself? And by the end of this video, you will finally have the exact words to explain it, and you will understand why this wiring is not a flaw. It is one of the rarest psychological strengths a person can have. But before we get into the brain science, I need to address something that almost every person watching this video has been carrying around for longer than they should have, and it is a quiet background belief that was installed by other people who genuinely meant well. And it is the belief that your comfort with solitude means something is missing, and the psychology of where that belief actually comes from is the first thing that needs to go. When someone who needs constant external stimulation to feel okay imagines what it would be like to spend a weekend completely alone, they are imagining their own internal experience of aloneness, which for them involves a drop in stimulation, a quieting of all input, and the gradual rise of something that feels uncomfortably like emptiness. And because the human brain instinctively assumes that other minds work similarly to its own, they look at you choosing solitude, and they see someone who must be suffering from what they would be suffering from. And that is where the worried questions come from. That is where the "are you okay" comes from. And the "you should get out more." And the "I just worry about you," because they are not seeing you, they are projecting themselves onto you. And this pattern almost always starts in childhood. These are the kids who could play alone for hours, who got completely lost in books and emerged blinking like they had just returned from somewhere else, who built entire worlds inside their heads that were more interesting to them than anything happening outside. And the adults around them worried and pushed and encouraged more social engagement, not understanding that the child was not lonely, they were deeply occupied. And here is the part that changes how you hear all of those worried questions. Forever their concern is not data about you, it is data about them. It is a window into how their own nervous system experiences aloneness, and understanding this does not mean you become cold toward their concern, it means you stop letting their experience define your reality. Because here's what is actually happening inside your brain when you are alone and genuinely content. And this is the layer that most videos about introversion never reach. They stay at the level of personality and preference without ever going into the neuroscience. And once you see what is measurably different about how your brain operates, the whole picture snaps into focus. And before we go there, drop a comment right now and tell me, has someone in your life ever made you feel like something was wrong with you? For loving solitude, I read every single one. Neuroscientists studying the brain during rest discovered something that fundamentally changed how psychologists understand the preference for solitude. And it involves a network inside the brain called the default mode network, which is the system that activates when you are not focused on the external world, when you are not tracking a conversation or performing a task, but simply existing with your own thoughts. And what the imaging showed is that in people who report genuine satisfaction with solitude, this network demonstrates significantly higher baseline activity, meaning their brains during rest are not waiting for something to engage with, they are already deeply engaged, generating thoughts, building connections between ideas, processing experiences, revisiting memories, constructing meaning, and following questions wherever they led. And what this means in practical terms is that for this type of brain, being alone does not produce a drop in stimulation, it produces a shift in the source of stimulation from external to internal, and that internal source is not a consolation prize. It is often richer, more layered, and more personally meaningful than anything the outside world can provide, because it is built entirely from everything you have ever thought, read, noticed, wondered, and understood. And that is why you have never run out of things to think about. And that is also why social interaction costs you something that it does not cost everyone. Your brain was not broken, it was building something the whole time. Because that cost is real and it is measurable, and most people who experience it have spent years assuming something was wrong with them for feeling it, when in reality the exhaustion you feel after extended social interaction is not a sign that you dislike people, or that you are broken in some way. It is a direct consequence of how your particular brain allocates its most limited resource. The brain has a finite amount of cognitive resources available at any given time, and those resources get allocated based on where attention is directed. And for a brain with a highly active internal world, social interaction requires something that does not cost everyone equally. It requires suppressing the internal engagement that is already naturally happening, so that attention can be redirected outward. You have to pause your own thoughts to track someone else's. You have to hold your own processing suspension while you follow an external conversation. And while you can do this, and often do it very well, it draws on the same cognitive reservoir that your internal world normally runs on. And this is why you can leave a social event that by every external measure went well and still feel genuinely depleted. And it is why the moment you get home and close the door, that particular kind of quiet relief floods in, because your brain has just been handed back its primary resource. It can stop suppressing and start processing again. And this is not antisocial behavior, it is not rudeness, and it is not a character flaw. It is the natural recalibration of a nervous system that has been running in a mode that is not its default. And understanding this one thing should permanently change how you talk to yourself after every social event you have ever left feeling exhausted. That exhaustion was never a character flaw, it was your mind asking to come home. But here's something that almost no video ever directly addresses, and if you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button right now, because what is coming next is the part that most people with this wiring have never heard explained, and it is the experience that many of them describe as the loneliest they have ever felt. And it has nothing to do with being alone, because the loneliest moments for this type of brain almost always happen in exactly the opposite situation. One of the most consistently reported experiences among people who genuinely thrive in solitude is the specific kind of loneliness that arrives not when they are alone, but when they are surrounded by people whose depth does not match their own. And psychologists call this phenomenon social loneliness, as distinct from physical aloneness. And it emerges from a mismatch between the level of internal complexity a person carries and the level of engagement the social environment is actually offering. When your mind is naturally drawn to depth, to ideas, to meaning, to the kind of conversation that actually goes somewhere, you can be sitting in a room full of people talking and feel a particular hollow ache that has nothing to do with the number of bodies present and everything to do with the absence of real contact. And what this reveals is something important about what people with rich inner worlds are actually looking for. When they do want connection, they are not avoiding people, they are being selective about which kind of contact actually nourishes them versus which kind leaves them feeling more alone than they were before they showed up. And that selectivity is not arrogance, it is self-knowledge. And it is also the reason that when the right conversation does happen with the right person, something in you opens completely that rarely opens in crowds. And this leads directly to something that most people with this wiring have never had language for, and that lack of language is part of why explaining yourself to the people in your life has always felt so difficult, because the thing you are trying to describe is real, and it is specific, and it has a name. And once you have that name, everything becomes much easier to say out loud. Psychology makes a critical distinction between two experiences that look identical from the outside. The first is unwanted isolation, which genuinely harms both mental and physical health. And the second is chosen solitude, which research consistently links to stronger creativity, deeper self-awareness, and more stable emotional regulation. And people who live in chosen solitude as their natural default are described in personality psychology as self-sufficient introverts, and that term matters. Because it is not just a label, it is a response for every worried parent, partner, or friend who has ever looked at your quiet weekend and asked the question you never knew how to answer, and that response is simply this: I am not lonely, I am self-sufficient, my mind does not need an audience to be fully occupied. And the proof is that I have never once run out of things to think about. So right now, hit the like button. If this gave you something real, hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because the next video goes into exactly why people with rich inner worlds often feel most misunderstood, not by strangers, but by the people closest to them. And that one is not something you want to miss. And drop a comment below and tell me, what is the one thing people in your life consistently get wrong about why you love being alone. I read every single one, and your answer might shape exactly what comes next.